everyone connecting to sound, joining our room. I see we have almost everybody from the waiting room in here now. And we're very happy to welcome you here today to this ACEF side event centered around the Renewables Global Status Report. I'm Duncan Gibb, member of REN21, who's worked on this GSR for the last several months. And I'm happy to welcome you here today. We hope we have some interesting presentations, panel discussions, and some engaging dynamic breakout sessions with all of you. So now that we have almost all of you in here, I would just remind you to stay muted for this part of the event. I'll call on you later to unmute yourself and to speak with us. But for now, if you could stay muted and turn your video on, we love to have actual people in the audience to talk to. So if you put your video on, that would be fantastic. Besides that, we are recording this session and we are live streaming it to YouTube. Sorry about that. 1 second, please. Sorry about that. We are just getting set up here. And we're going to start the session in just a moment. So please keep yourselves muted, keep your videos on, and the YouTube live stream has begun. So I'm really thrilled to pass this over to David Alzinga now from the Asian Development Bank. David is a senior energy specialist at ADB. He's been a member of the ACEF steering committee for several years now and has been a big part of the planning and the development of this event. So we're really happy to welcome David here to share with us some thoughts to get things started today. Over to you, David.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to welcome the discussion on the Global Status Report today as part of the 2021 Asia Clean Energy Forum. And you know, as I look back on the last year at the pandemic that we've gone through and all the uncertainty that puts globally, but in the energy sector, it's essential to see this report come out in such a time. And I think it's so challenging to comment on the energy sector as we go through a period like this, but it really emphasizes the need for such a report to just show where things are at and offering the guidance, the comprehensive guidance in the renewable energy sector as we look to really clean the energy systems, reach towards net zero targets and really find ways to, in the developing countries that ADB works in, how to really support economic development in a low carbon fashion. I've looked over the report that was just released yesterday. I really want to congratulate the team that's worked on this. And I went back and looked at some of the older reports that have happened over the last years. I think this is the 15th one. And it's just so impressive to see the scale of work that now goes into a report on renewables that is looking at energy efficiency, supply chains, recycling, renewable integration. It just shows how much renewable energy works across the energy system. It's not just about wind and solar. It's really in all the sectors. So it's an incredibly comprehensive report and really offering the guidance that's needed to transition the energy system, and especially important in this year of COP26. A couple reflections. As I look at this, we're talking at the Asia Clean Energy Forum, where our work is in developing countries. And so as I look at the energy system and renewables, these are 3 points that I think are really important. Developing countries have a key objective to really grow their economies, to build their societies. And in this case, renewable energies need to develop the compelling case. Why do we do renewables? How do we support the development paradigm? And I think that indeed, we're seeing that come out in the messages of this report this year. The second point, there still remain objections. So how can those be addressed? And I think cost is one main one, but I continue to hear issues of integrating solar and wind into power systems, even when the countries are incredibly low shares. So those have to be addressed. Those best practices worldwide need to come out and say, you can do this. This is possible to make this transition. And then the last point, I think that is of most importance, is really what are those policies needed that move away from fossil fuels. These are still favored, but it doesn't mean they're the best solution. So moving away from those and supporting renewables. And I think the economic case is there, the technical and innovation case is there. So now we just really need to make that happen. So with that, I want to turn it back to our host. Congratulations again to a great report this year. It's great to have you part of the Asia Clean Energy Forum. And I look forward to hearing from the speakers that we have here today. Back to you, Duncan.
Thank you very much, David. Those are very insightful remarks to get us kicked off here. It's wonderful to have you here. I'd like to hand it over now to Ksenia Petrochenko from UNESCAP. She can spell that acronym out for you. I don't have it in mind. And she is going to be taking care of our moderation with this great panel we have lined up. And first, a bit of a presentation. So over to you, Ksenia.
Thank you very much, Duncan. And thank you, David, for great introduction, really setting the scene for this very important discussion today. My name is Ksenia Petrochenko. I'm Economic Affairs Officer with Energy Division of United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, ESCAP for short. I would like to welcome everyone who joined this event. We have a very important topic to discuss in a very interesting agenda. So I will be the moderator of the discussion today and just would like to let everyone know that we'll have 4 very interesting parts of this session. We will start with presentation by Rana Adib, Executive Director of REN21 on key findings from Renewables 2021 Global Status Report. And we'll have opportunity to ask Rana questions. So please actively participate in that part and send us your questions. It would be a very interesting discussion. Followed by expert panel, which I will introduce when we get there. And the final part will be audience discussion in breakout groups. So that's a very interesting, a bit unusual format where we would like to have discussion with you and really hoping for your active participation on a very important topic of this event. So please stay with us and until the end and come to the breakout groups as well. So just following on David's introduction, and I also would like to join him in congratulating REN21 team and all experts and contributors to such a comprehensive report, which really puts renewable energy into the context of the crucial sustainable energy transition, which we all have to be part of. And while it's especially important for this region, for Asia and the Pacific, while the progress in development of renewable energy has been quite rapid in the region, the share of renewable energy in the final energy mix is still relatively low compared to other global regions. And regional economies must address the key barriers to wide and widely spread uptake of renewable energy. So the renewable energy pricing varies across economies. Fossil fuels continue to be favored in a number of national contexts, particularly in those countries where domestic fossil fuel resources are available. However, we can clearly see from the report and from recent developments that there are technologies which are being improved. Efficiency of renewable energy is improving, the economy of scale is also growing, and more competitive supply chains are being developed. So that all among other drivers which can help us to increase renewable energy share. Therefore, it's very important to come together to this event and discuss, especially in the Asian context, how we approach the further uptake of renewable energy in such a diverse and really large region. So in this discussion, I would also like to remind you a little bit of how we're going about the event and a little bit about the Zoom etiquette. So please feel free to have your video on. It's always great to have some people on on the screen whom we're talking to, but please stay muted and prepare your questions, send us questions. There will be a number of opportunities where we can answer them, and we would really like to also hear from you in this way. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Rana Adib, Executive Director, REN21, to deliver her presentation. Rana, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ksenia, and thanks, Duncan, for the introduction, and David, too. I think this is a perfect framing, and we're always very excited, actually, to be part of ACEF because very clearly Asia, as a massive region, is clearly one of the most relevant regions in really making the global change to renewable energy happen. And I think it's really important that we combine, do not only have these global discussions, but also really dive into what is happening in the regions and taking into account the local particularities too. So from my side, I'm going to present you the global part because we have great experts basically from the region who will step in later. I think you can see my screen. Yes, great. So for the ones of you who do not know REN21, very quickly, because it really also explains how the Global States Report is being developed. REN21 is a global community of players from science, academia, NGOs, governments, and industry. All these players working together to create crowdsourced information, inform, but also influence decision makers, and push the debates and the dialogues on renewable energy. What is really interesting here, I think, is that as a multi-stakeholder network, but also as a global network, there is a diversity of perspectives coming together. And I think this is extremely reflective of what is needed today when we're speaking about mainstreaming renewable energy. It's not a topic, we're not speaking about a fuel switch here. We're speaking about a systems change towards efficient and renewable-based energy systems and economies and societies. Now, the Renewables Global States Report is indeed a report we are producing since 2005. And this is a massive crowdsourced information report. So here we have, in this edition, we have approximately 200 experts worldwide who participated, shared their insights and reviewed basically the information. We're looking into global trends, policies, markets, but specifically also into distributed renewables for access, investment, and as David had mentioned, to reflect also that the system change we're looking into is much broader. The whole question of integration, efficiency, and decarbonization. This year, we have put a specific focus also on business demand for renewable energy because we feel that it's extremely important to underline that drivers are not only coming from the supply side, but much is actually happening on the demand side. You will see this later. Now, let me start with the results. So as we all know, 2020 has been a disruptive year. It has also been a year of new norms. And there are many different ones. I would like to underline two, which are really important. I think there are new norms in terms of ambition. There have never been as many net zero targets as in 2020. From national governments, subnational governments, cities, but also corporations. And I think that is really something to underline because there is an ambition. We cannot step back on that. The other part is that clearly in the COVID context, in the economic crisis context, we have seen that governments can do massive things and mobilize resources and take bold action. So I think this is clearly something which we can use as a reference. Now, what is important? So I mentioned the net zero targets announced in 2020, and some basically, in particular in Asia, are obviously quite important when we're looking to China, Japan, South Korea. Possibly they are covering 80% of the global CO2 emissions. So that's really the potential. The reality is, however, that only 1/5 are are enacted, so are in law. Now, I'm going to tell the Global States Report story a bit differently this year. I think it's reflective of the 2020 new norm, I guess. Walk the talk. What do the renewable energy numbers tell us about this when we're looking at this new standard in terms of ambition? The reality is when we're looking into the G20 countries, and we're focusing here because they are basically key polluters and key emitters in terms of CO2, we see that from the G20 countries, only 5 countries have a target on renewable energy. And here there is clearly already a disconnect when we see that there are net zero targets. It clearly means, considering the fact that fossil fuel is responsible for 2/3 of the CO2 emissions, that we need to phase out fossil fuel and move to efficiency and renewables. Now, from those 5 countries, only 3 have met this renewable energy target in 2020. Walk the talk beyond G20. And I think this is, again, unfortunately not a positive story. And I don't want to depress all of you, but I think it's really important that we address our blind spots. For the renewable energy targets have not been achieved. And we also see that there is a limited amount of countries that had targets. And so on the right side, you see the ones which have been achieved. On the left side, the ones that have not been achieved. The first thing we can see is that there is very little economy-wide targets, and on heating and transport, it's extremely flat, and you'll see that this is really a big problem. Now, the other part is that the targets have very often not been achieved, and or have then also not been renewed. So there is not a continuity in terms of aspiration. The reality is, on the other hand, again, we know the target is not what is the key driver. It gives you the indication in what direction to go, but we need to have the right policy and regulatory frameworks. And when we are looking here, unfortunately, the picture is really not better. The renewable energy policies have been stagnating. For the first time, there have not been more countries having renewable energy policies. And when we're looking to the renewable power policies, there is clearly a focus here. When we're looking into heating and cooling and transport, which are sectors that are lagging far behind in terms of renewable energy shares and developments, they have been stagnating or even decreasing since 2017. So rather a varying result. Now let's do a reality check when we're looking into the markets and capacity developments, because possibly things might be happening without the targets and the policies. Let's look at investment. So the good news is that investment has slightly increased, and to be honest, it has even, so renewable energy investment and capacities have been the only power technology basically where such an increase was seen. There was an increase of 2% considering the economic crisis. That's something which is rather positive. Now, the reality, however, is, and IRENA and IEA both share this assessment, if we are serious about the 1.5 development goal and the sustainable development goal, 1.5 degree and sustainable development goal, the investment in renewable energy must at least triple by 2030. So we are comparing 2% to 200%, just to see where we stand and the gap we have. The other part is clearly, and when we're looking into the investment, we see that the economic situation in the countries differs a lot. So in industrialized countries, OECD countries, there was a plus of 13% in terms of investment. When we're looking into the developing world, there was a decrease of 7%. And this is very much driven by the fact that there was a decrease. So investment have fallen compared to 2019 in China by 12% and in India by 36%. So it also shows the importance of those two countries. Now, you have heard us speaking a lot about the sectoral disconnect and the realities between the power sector and heating, cooling, and transport. I think it's really important to underline how important this is. In the power sector, renewable energy represented a share of 27.1%. In heating and cooling, 10.2%, in transport 3.4%. And I pause here deliberately. The reality is, when we're speaking about a systems change, we need to look into energy, which is everywhere. And this also means that the transition cannot happen. We're not speaking about a fuel switch. We're speaking about changes that need to occur in the energy supply side and in the energy demand side. And this also means that we need to involve basically players into the energy discussion that are very often not yet sitting around the table. And here is, interestingly, the news which has been picked up most by press. It's interesting because as a renewable energy network, what has been picked up by press is the fact that the share of fossil fuel in the total final energy demand has basically been flat over the last 10 years. It has dropped from 80.3 to 80.2%. The renewable energy share has increased from 8.7 to 11.2. But the reality is that the world is burning more fossil fuel than ever. And this is linked to energy demand that increased, but it's also linked to the fact that the renewable energy, so when we're looking at the growth, only 1/4 approximately comes from renewables. So there is very clearly not a sufficient understanding for the fact that a system shift means to keep oil, gas, and coal in the ground, and also develop strategies to phase out existing capacities and then build on efficiency and renewables. So admittedly, and that's a voice we hear, can renewable energy deliver? That's not a rhetorical question. But the reality is that the numbers show us that they can deliver, and the power sector clearly shows us the way here. More than 250 gigawatt of renewable power have been added in 2020. With mainly driven by solar PV and wind. In the wind sector, we see that onshore and offshore is being developed more and more. And there was a record increase basically globally. And the reason why this is the case is that the technology is there, it's mature. We know basically how to deploy it. And today it is a least cost option. And this is clearly reflected by the fact that over 80% of the new capacity additions on the power side have been building on renewable energy. Today, in some countries, new renewable power capacities are even competing with existing coal capacities. And that is clearly, so I heard David, and I think there is still myth out there on the real economics. And the reality is also that the real cost of oil and gas and coal are basically not integrated into the cost comparison, but also the fact that over 110 countries are still subsidizing fossil fuel. I would like to underline one aspect which we have seen in 2020. Regardless of the economic crisis, or maybe because of the economic crisis and the environmental crisis and the health crisis, we see new players coming up. The capacity addition 2020 over 2019 have grown in general globally by 10%. When we're looking at corporate capacities in power purchase agreement, we have a growth of 18%. And the feedback we have is clearly that companies are not doing this always for environmental reasons. Very clearly, it also plays a role because there is more and more environmental and the social governance parameters being built in. But the reality is it makes economic sense. And that is clearly something which I would like to underline, because I also feel that the transition also means to find players on the demand side who can take decisions where they get the energy from and can clearly be active players in driving the change. Now, you could say like, and here I'm coming back and almost closing, COVID was our starting point, 2020. The economic recovery packages, there have been many calls actually for taking these as an opportunity to change the game. The US dollar, euro, whatever energy monetary unit can only be spent once. So it was very clear that there was a call to use this and move out of fossil fuel into efficiency and renewables. Unfortunately, the news here is not great. Looking into the economic recovery packages, we rather have a missed opportunity than a game-changing situation. Here, this is building on 31 countries analyzed, and the reality is that fossil fuel has been supported 6 times more than renewable energy in the economic recovery packages. Now, what does this mean today, all this data, and what do we need to call for, and where do we also need to share the information and raise the awareness? 2020 has clearly been a new norm of ambition, and I think that is something which we need to have. It can't be moved anymore. We also see that unfortunately net zero targets is not enough. It's very clear that we need roadmaps, and we do not only need roadmaps, we need regulator frameworks to really enable the positive messages and the real advantages renewable present to thrive in the markets. The other part is clearly that the structural shift from fossil fuel to renewable energy needs to happen in all societal and economic activities. And this means no new fossil fuel capacities, phasing out fossil fuel capacities, and developing efficiency and renewables on the other side. It also means that we need to involve different types of players into the discussion because they are all decision makers. And from one side, we are clearly calling for making renewable energy, and in particular the renewable energy share, a key performance indicator in every policy, economic activity, investment, and decision. Why a performance indicator? So I'm not very sportive. I can decide one day that I want to go to the Olympics and win. So this is my vision. I will not get there if I don't put myself in the right conditions, if I don't start to work with the right persons, create the right frameworks, and perform toward this goal. So the performance really means that you're putting something into the center of the attention, but that you are also ready to improve on it and be held accountable when you did good or not. And that's it from my side. Back to you, Xenia.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rena, for a very insightful presentation with such powerful messages, I think, for the whole sustainable energy community. We have a couple of minutes for questions, and maybe I'll use my role as a moderator and ask you a question very relevant to the region. As you know, in Asia, cooling is one of the key topics, and we at ASCAP are also working with a number of countries, helping them on national cooling action plans development together with Cool Coalition and UNEP. And in Southeast Asia, for example, alone, cooling is expected to be the fastest growing consumer of electricity over the next 2 decades, among other end users. So I'm just wondering, what do you see as the key challenges in limiting this growth, and how can we make sure that cooling is based on renewable energy, and how we can help the uptake in this end use?
Mm-hmm. So I think one part is very clearly, and yes, I think cooling is extremely important to look at, especially as it's a matter of resilience to climate change, but also clearly creates economic opportunities and necessities with regard to this. So I think what we clearly see as a trend, and this is very much driven by also decreasing costs on the renewable power side, is an electrification of certain energy sectors. And clearly cooling, so heating and cooling is part of it, but also transportation with e-mobility. So this is one entry point. The other part is, however, that there is an understanding, I think, that the use of renewable energy can be supported by incentives, but also by obligations. And when we're speaking today about cooling, we're very often speaking about new capacities and new energy services. So very clearly in the building sector, for instance, we see that, I think if I'm not mistaken, it was like 2/3 of the new buildings are being built in countries that do not have an energy related framework, regulated framework. I mean, this is This is unbelievable. And I think Peter can probably share some more insights on this. The other part also is that I think there is electricity and electrification plays a big role here, but the reality is also that there are also thermal applications. And in particular, when we're looking into the commercial and industrial cooling needs, it's very clear that we are not speaking about district heating systems only anymore, but district energy systems and district cooling systems. And I think this is clearly solutions do exist. They do not. I mean, the district energy systems exist since many years. So I think there is a good understanding of how to operate them. And very clearly, there can be engagements of the governments, national governments, but also subnational governments. So cities play a big role here in driving this. And I think this clearly showed that there is also a need for a stronger integration of the policy levels, so the national and the subnational policy levels.
Excellent. So many important points, especially on thermal applications. I think they are so often overlooked, and there is so much focus on electrification. But thank you for such a comprehensive answer. I know that we would need to move soon to the next point on the agenda, but we do have a question from the audience. So I will just read it out. What are the key hurdles governments face to decrease and finally stop fossil fuel subsidies, which are present still around 3 times more per year than total renewable energy investments?
Mm-hmm. So I think we can say like major hurdles, and probably there is not one single answer to this, because it depends very much on the situation in the countries. It is a country that has own resources. Is it a country where energy access plays a role still, where subsidies on the electricity prices, etc., are important for social and economic reasons, etc. So I think this is this maybe just to frame it, there is not one single answer. I think there are in general, however, phasing out subsidies is something which is not easy when it is anchored since so many years in the economic and political space, let's say, and even in power dynamics. So here there clearly need to be strategies, dialogues, discussions, how to create the understanding why it is necessary, but also make players understand that it's not about another burden, but it's creating other opportunities. And I think I always think about this, and it's very far away from Asia, but I always think about this example in Denmark. Globally, there is a support for renewable energy. Locally, we still see a lot of pushback, for instance, against wind turbines, etc. In Denmark, things have changed in the moment when the farmer thought, when this wind turbine is turning, this is money on my bank account. And I think this is exactly where we need to start discussions which go a bit beyond subsidies or not subsidies, but really developing strategies on subsidy switches. And the other part is very clearly that today, if we're serious about climate change and addressing this, and if we're serious about sustainable development goals, we also need to have a discussion about the fact that fossil fuel is the main polluter. So there needs to be a price on fossil fuel, so a price on pollution, and carbon pricing is clearly one of the elements also which can adjust here. And automatically, even without looking at the fossil fuel subsidies here, the economic comparison will be quite different in this case.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rana, so much for this great answer. I totally agree. The main question is we need to answer is why we need the subsidies, and if we can achieve the same goal, but by cleaner means and redirect investments towards more sustainable energy. Thank you so much for your presentation and for your great answers. I know we can continue this discussion with you for hours, but we will move to our panel now. And I know there are more questions coming in the chat, so maybe some of them will get addressed during our panel discussion, and we will have a Q&A after panel discussion as well. Thank you, Rana. So moving to the panel discussion, I would like to introduce our great panelists. Today we have Mika Obayashi, Director of Renewable Energy Institute, Peter Lundberg, Head of Operations, Asia Pacific Urban Energy Association. Hi, Mika. Hi, Peter. And Ayu Abdullah, Co-Executive Director, Energy Action Partners. Hello, everyone. Let's welcome our panelists. So I'll start with posing sort of question linked to Rana's presentation to everyone, and you can answer in whoever wants to go first. So I think one of the key messages from Rana's presentation was to propose to use the share of renewables as a key performance indicator in public and private decision making in order to track the actual progress on sustainable energy transition. We saw from her presentation that there are a number of targets in many countries, but only some of them are being achieved and others are lagging behind. So my question, in your view, what are the key aspects of approaching the share of renewables as the key performance indicator? What are the sectors or impact areas we need to consider when we follow this approach? And I also saw that in the chat there was a related question, like how can a government incorporate renewable energy share KPI into social policy, for example? So that's one of the area which renewable energy is definitely covering as well. So just really interested to hear your thoughts. How do we approach this key performance indicator question? Who would like to start? Peter, do you want to go first? I see mine.
Maybe I can start then. Yes, I think it's an interesting question, and so I think coming from an organization that are working a lot with thermal energy, as you discussed a little bit, heating and cooling, and as we are based here in Bangkok, we have a quite strong focus on cooling. I think it's interesting to tie maybe a KPI to projects and developments. So when planning new project developments, there should be talk about certification in terms of energy efficiency, other environment solution, but it could also be how this project, if it's a heating or cooling project, it really goes in line with, say, targets of renewable energy. And also, I think what also needs to be mentioned is that if you have a high share of renewables, there's a high need of flexibility. So flexibility can give a score as well in integrating renewables, and thermal networks, thermal energy systems are good at that. We can have store energy. So I think tying KPIs on a project basis, maybe in a certification way, could be one way. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, very, very interesting approach. I wonder what our other panelists have to say. Any reactions? Mika, maybe? Would you like to go next?
Okay, thank you very much. And maybe that I will share my screen with one slide with some graphics. And can you see my screen now? Right?
Yes, very well. Thank you.
Okay, so for high share of renewables, what does it mean for our work? For my team and me, that it's more than double the current share target of the Japanese government for 2030 and 100 by 2050. We need to make progress on the basis of numbers. So we need to access the governmental statistics of energies, and the measurement of this progress needs to be grounded in the actual generated amount, but also with consideration of curtailment mitigation measures. So you could see that some progress of the renewables in Japan, for example, from 2010 to 2019, the past 10 years that we have developed that more than the renewables, like a kind of a most generated additional electricity that in Japan. And also that we have added that almost 64 gigawatt of PVs in Japan. And then another indicator could be a kind of a cost of renewables, because we are aiming the 100% of renewables. It means we need cheap, and a lot of amount of renewable is needed. And then we have to make the renewables cheap as it is possible. So the declining cost could be one of the indicator that how we can develop the renewables. And then also the governmental target, that the current government target in Japan is 22 to 24% of renewables by 2030. And it is under discussion. But actually the 22% that we have already reached last year. So the kind of the continuous, how can I say, comparison of the current status and then further target is needed to achieve that the further more target of renewables. That is my comment.
Thank you. Very important point. I totally agree. So we're actually now thinking of a dynamic KPI, not that we will carve it in stone, but we should always look how far we towards it, and maybe make adjustments and take actions to make sure that our goals and targets are ambitious enough. And yeah, thank you for the point on the costs. That's very much linked to our discussion with Rana on the subsidies. Of course, if we can make renewable energy more competitive, that makes the transition much easier. Thank you. So I'll turn to Ayu on her points, please.
Yeah, thank you. So hi, my name is Ayu, and I am co-executive director of Energy Action Partners, and we are based in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. And I'm going to come at this from a completely different perspective, since we are primarily an energy access organization. So, you know, the communities and the people and the groups that we work with are, we're talking about, you know, part of the over 700 million people worldwide who still have a lack of access to electricity, over 2 billion people who still are, you know, depending on traditional cooking fuels. So for these communities, I just wanted to remind everyone that it is, they are actually, the only option for them is renewable energy when we're talking about all these remote rural communities. And so they already are, a lot of them have transitioned. I mean, a lot of, you know, there are thousands of communities in South Asia, Southeast Asia that are running on microhydro system, biogasifiers for decades. And so they've transitioned a lot earlier than the urban communities. And I wanted to point out that, you know, so the final energy share in renewable energy is very critical to them to move away from dependencies on, you know, fossil fuels and external structures. But that, you know, I wanted to point out that they're oftentimes not counted in the energy transition, you know, numbers, and the policies and the regulations oftentimes don't remember, in a sense, that these communities are on the front lines of the transition. It's very critical for them to be able to access renewable energy. So to these communities, they already are, you know, using a high share of renewables. And I just wanted to emphasize that they need to be counted and included, because I think it's, you know, there's been a report that was recently released by IRENA, a consortium of international organizations, saying that we're not on track to achieve SDG 7. And so if we don't also prioritize the energy access problem, we're going to not achieve, you know, all our renewable energy targets and shares. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Ayu, for really bringing energy access, your perspective on energy access into this discussion on renewable energy. Absolutely a critical point, and I agree, very often overlooked. I can't emphasize how important it is to actually start providing and expanding the access with renewable energy. Otherwise, we are running the risk of locking in and stranded assets and not delivering on transition, as you said. In urban context, in Asia, one of the crucial problems is also informal settlements, which also lack in a number of cases the access to sustainable energy and reliable energy. So it's not only we need to make sure that rural communities have the access, but we also need to address this issue within urban context as well. Thank you. A very important perspective, which we need to incorporate in this KPI narrative. So we have still time for maybe another round of questions before we end the panel. So I want to maybe continue the discussion, but take us beyond the energy context and maybe discuss what other key areas linked to renewable energy we need to take into account when we look at measuring the progress. What are the key social and economic maybe areas of our life and global goals which we need to take into account when we're delivering on renewables, and maybe what are the key drivers which can help us to make sure that the uptake of renewable energy is happening. Peter, would you like to continue on that point?
Sure. So I can continue on that, and just want to mention one more thing there if you talk about cooling, and cooling produces about 10% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, but only about 80% of that comes from energy use, and the other 20% is direct emissions from refrigerants. So you have to look into the refrigerant part, because those exist in all ACs and all chillers, basically. So that's why you maybe have to add another KPI as well. In terms of that. No, but what I would like to mention is the need for urban planning, and because I can take an example here in Bangkok. So if you have a development here, you're required to, let's say, both provide your own heat cooling and also your own sewage facility. So basically that means that all projects are depending on themselves. But if you have big projects, we have one big development here in Bangkok called One Bangkok. It's the largest fully integrated district in Thailand, and it will consist of about 16 buildings, including shopping centers, malls, residential buildings, office buildings. And so when it comes to that kind of large development, and they of course will choose district cooling, they will have a thermal energy storage, but they also integrate the use of treated sewage water for all the toilets, and also for makeup water in the cooling towers. So basically that shows the potential for any district that in a city. If you do proper urban planning, you can achieve so much by just integrating energy and sewage, for example. So I think that is a very important part and a key to access all the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Very important point on the integrated approach and how we can integrate renewable energy into urban planning and cross-cutting issues. We have been looking at it together with UNEP as well on a number of city projects in Asia. And I think the assessment is that if we implement such an integrated approach with energy and waste and water, that can help us to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 30% more approximately, depending on the solution. So I think that's definitely something we need to take into account. Mika, would you like to go next?
Yeah, okay. So the high share of renewables, that integration, I think that the wide area operation, as Peter, that first comment that said like a kind of a grid flexibility is quite needed, but it is also important from the point of view of energy independence. I think that it's related to what Ayu said. The desirable thing is for energy independent regions, communities to be connected and operated efficiently over the wide area. So that's kind of integration is quite needed. So we have to see the view of the self-efficiency, self-sufficiency of energy thing.
Great, thank you. You do have a reaction on that?
Yeah, so I wanted to follow up on that point. I think that's exactly actually what I was going to say, was that one of the key lessons that are coming out from the energy access space is the idea of, decentralization and what that means. And what that means is that, communities are no longer passive consumers, they're active participants in the energy system. And so I think when we're talking about social indicators, when we're talking about social progress of the renewable energy transition, what I would really like to see is more choices, more opportunities, greater awareness on the consumer side of what they have available to them. And I think those are the key lessons that we can learn from rural communities that are off grid, is the fact that they are in control of their own power system and they've created choices for themselves. And that's what we want to see in urban areas as well: more opportunities, more choices. And then measuring that, by the opportunities that have been created by access to these choices. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ayu. I think so many important aspects are coming out of this discussion, and that makes me think that key performance indicator as a share of renewable is a very complex issue, and so many parts need to be integrated to make sure that we're really tracking the progress in this way. So we talked about maybe breaking it down to the project level and really looking how projects at the local level are connected to national policies and global goals. We spoke about the need to bring the cost even further down to make sure that renewable energy is attractive as the investment opportunity. And I brought the angle of energy access and making sure that renewable energy and energy access are very much linked together. Also linking it to the grid flexibility and decentralization opportunity, and really seeing how renewable energy empowers consumers to make their choices, to bring more opportunities to sustainable energy solution, and really make their consumption more sustainable, cleaner, more renewable. I think it has been a great discussion, and our panelists really set a very good scene, and I can for breakout sessions, and I can see there is a lot of discussion going on in the chat, and REN21 colleagues are doing their best to reply to those questions. So I would encourage everyone to bring those ideas and all your questions to breakout rooms, and you will have such a great opportunity to discuss this and many other aspects of this key message of looking at renewable energy share as a key performance indicator for sustainable energy transition. I would like to thank all panelists for their great ideas and so many insights into the topic. And would like to conclude this panel. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, all the panelists. And thank you, Ksenia, as well, for this great moderation. It was really really great way to capture all these different ideas and perspectives. And you said it as I was going to. We've got a lot of fire in the chat right now, and that's great. We would just encourage you all to bring this enthusiasm to the next stage of our event. And so now we want to encourage you to keep yourselves muted for the moment, but then we're going to be moving into breakout rooms. Or no, sorry, unmute yourselves. That's what I wanted to say. So turn your videos on, unmute yourselves, and now instead of writing on a keyboard, you can tell us what you really think. And we're going to move you into breakout rooms where we'll ask you to share your opinion on one of our key questions around the idea of using renewable energy share as a key performance indicator. And so you all are coming from different sectors, different lines of work, and this idea of using renewable energy as a KPI might be a bit new to you. So we'd like to hear from your perspective, what would that mean in your sector, in your line of work? If renewable energy was this KPI, how would that change things? Or maybe there's something you don't understand about the concept, and we're just happy to hear from you about this. And I think I'll leave it to my team now to our team to send us to the breakout rooms, and we look forward to having some dynamic discussions with you there.